in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk about the UFC antitrust settlement offer. But first, before we get into all that, let's check in with John and see how his week has been.
Yes.
It's been busy, right?
Oh my God. Today's been very busy. Very, very, very busy. Unfortunately, they dumped a filing and just a million declarations and stuff with it. And on top of that, I'm back in Minnesota taking care of my mom, who's elderly right now, all by myself. And so all that happens is I'm trying to make dinner. It's a mess over here. Woe is me.
Poor pitiful John. But you know what? We're going to talk about some really juicy tidbits here. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Now, today, as we mentioned just a few seconds ago, there was a new filing in the Lee versus Zuffa antitrust lawsuit. Tell us what was filed.
Well, what they filed was what's called the Plaintiff's Memorandum of Law in support of motion for preliminary approval of the settlement. And on top of that, we have the preliminary approval plan of allocation, approval of the notice plan was part of it, and approval of the proposed scheme for completing the settlement process. So we have all that in this filing and a bunch of declarations. So that's what we got today.
Okay, just as a reminder, this is just for Lee versus Zuffa, not for the other case, the Johnson versus Zuffa, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is only Lee. People remember the judge had a problem with Lee and Johnson being on the same settlement plan because they have in conflict of interest with each other. So for this settlement, it is only Lee, and Johnson will continue as a separate case, completely separate.
Before we go over all of those declarations, well, obviously we won't go over all of them because there's a lot of them. But before we get to the ones we're going to look at, let's talk about that proposed settlement. Now, give us the breakdown of some of those details for those out there that may not have been paying attention for the last few weeks.
Okay, well, there's going to be a lot of reading, a lot of work on my part. As we said, we are recording just shortly after we got the files, right? So I had read over as much as I could, posted some of it, but we're going to go into more in detail. And to get ready, let me get my sparkling water that someone sent me ready. Oh, that's whoever did that was a saint. Let me get on my reading glasses so you might hear them going underneath the headphones for a second. Oh, yes, I can see now. So I am set to go through this filing for everybody. Okay, so here's what we got. There was, in that long thing I described earlier, the motion that they filed, what it is they are asking the judge to approve the settlement. And they are presenting their case of why he should approve the settlement. And in the details of it, they call for $375 million to go to the fighters now. Where if you remember, the previous settlement was $335 million. They also call for all the settlement to go to Lee. So where the previous one, 90% of that 335 would go to Lee. This one, 375 go to just the Lee class and not Lee and Johnson. So it's a $73.5 million increase over the previous one. And so they break that down, what the allocation is going to be. They go over what the payment schedule might be for the UFC. And then they include a bunch of declarations to kind of show what the fighters, at least a large group of them, think about the case so far.
Do we know how much the attorneys are going to be asking for?
Yeah, in fact, we do. The attorneys, they break it down. The portion that was originally going to go to Lee, of the 90% of the $335 million, they are asking, because as we know, they are working on contingency, so they only get paid if they win. They're asking for 1/3 of that. But the additional new money, they're asking for only 20% of it. So if you add that together, and that's about 30.7% of the settlement. In addition to that, there's up to $12 million in additional expenses for experts and the other expenses they accrued. So by my calculation, if you add that together and deduct by what they're asking for, the fighters should get about $248 million of the $375 million should be left for the fighters after the attorneys recoup their expenses and take their cut for working basically for free this whole time.
Do we have any idea how much a fighter can expect to get from this settlement?
Well, we do all that too. If you look at the numbers, right, that they're proposing, we know from previously that the total amount of paid to the league class, and I should, for people that are listening, a lot of fighters, we've discovered that fighters listen to the show occasionally and follow this. So for fighters listening, if you fought between December 16, 2010 to June 30, 2017 in the UFC, you're part of the league class automatically. The total payment that the UFC made to fighters for their bout compensation during that period was $556.5 million. So because we know that, and we know how many fights that took place during that period, we can figure out what the fighters are going to make. Of the settlement, 70% right now, it can change based on the judge, what he says, but right now 70% is going to be based on how much you made in total during the class period. So you want to take your win bonus, your show pay, plus whatever win bonuses you made during that period, plus any discretionary locker room bonuses, plus any performance fight of the night type bonuses, plus any side letters you made or any pay-per-view bonuses. All those, but not like the Reebok kit payments and not royalties for your image rights, just the bout compensation. You take all that and you add it together, and you should get a payment of about 31% of all that you earn there. That's for the bout compensation portion. Then there's a per bout pro rata compensation. And so you divide the total number of fights took place in the UFC during this period by how much, which is 30% of the settlement goes to that. That means for every fight you have in the UFC, you should get about $13,800 for every fight you had in the UFC. So if we take a fighter, just an imaginary fighter that fought 10 times in the UFC during this class period, and he made $500,000, let's say, during this period, he should get in total about $289,000 in compensation as part of the settlement.
Wow. That's impressive.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, then some fighters, there's some fighters that fought, let's say 5 times, made $50,000. They are looking at close to almost over $80,000. So more than what they earned during the period in the UFC. Other fighters who made a lot, who are going to make more, but it's going to be a smaller percentage. The highest paid fighter based on our calculations is Anderson Silva, made the most during the class period. And we estimate his settlement based on this formula would be about $10 million.
So he's going to get more than Conor.
Well, he made more than Conor during this class period. He made about $30 million, where Conor McGregor, I think, made $27 million as a UFC fighter. So it excludes Conor's boxing match. But, well, that took place after the class period anyway, so it wouldn't be counted anyway. So scratch that. Anderson Silva made more during the period. He will be the highest paid on the fighter on the settlement.
Okay. How about when they can expect to get paid?
Well, that's a good question. What we'd have to do is, if you look in the allocation portion, what's going to happen is the judge approves it. There'll be a series of payments the UFC will make. I think it's 3 payments, $135 million apiece. I could be mistaken. I don't have it right in front of me. But they'll make several payments until June of next year. I think it's 3 payments total. And then after that period, you would expect, as long as it's been agreed by the judge and there's no delays caused by, there's various possible reasons it could be delayed. But if none of that happened, then my guess would be sometime a month or 2 after that fall payment. Well, I'm sorry, it's 3 payments of $125 million each from the UFC. I found it on the page right here. And the last one will be on June 30th, 2025, according to the plan. So within, a month or 2 after that, I imagine, if the fighters have submitted their claim, because they're going to send a lot of flyers out to fighters, a lot of them, they're going to try to contact all the fighters. And as we normally do, we will include at the bottom contact information. So if you're a fighter, make sure you contact the plaintiffs because it gives you a chance to voice either your disapproval with this plan or also to make sure you're on a list so you can get your money, because we want you to get your goddamn money. It's yours. And so if you're on one of the claimants, approved claimants, then within probably a month or two after that final payment, you will get a check and it'll be all over.
And for the fighters out there that may be listening, wondering what John is talking about, that we'll have it listed. With each one of these podcasts, we do a little small write-up, letting everybody know it's basically our outline and an introduction to the show so that you know what it's about. But at the bottom of every single show for the past 3-4 months, we've been putting all of that information at the bottom because you can still use that information to keep track of what's going on with this antitrust case. So if you're a fighter and you're listening, check out the written portion of this too on our newsletter where this podcast comes out, because all the pertinent information you need is at the bottom.
See, now you know why we have her as my producer. to explain the nonsense that I screw up, to correct me, and give you key information that I failed to convey.
It's only because his brain is otherwise occupied with all of these facts that I have to pluck out because he's got lots of them. Now, let's get back to some more facts. What arguments do they make to convince the judge to accept the settlement?
Well, they do several. One is they point out that the percentage is basically 40% of the low end of the estimates, right? So it's a sizable settlement compared by antitrust class action standards. And they have 3 estimates they use. The most famous one, the most commonly recited, is the Halsinger, $811 million to 1.6 billion, but he has another estimate that's about 894 million, I believe. And then Andrew Zimbalist, the other economist expert they used, he has an estimate in the 900 millions. So when you average out those 3 estimates, the lower end, it's about 40% of the low end of single damages. In other words, what they're asking for, what they claim they were damaged by. And if you treble them, it's about 14% of the damage is trebled. So, and then they compare them to other cases and show that this is actually a pretty good recovery. And we can argue about that. I think it probably, compared to other cases, it probably is a pretty good recovery. We got to remember the Lee class, after they lost the injunctive relief in this class, it lost probably its number one tool to extract as much as possible without going to trial from the UFC, because the UFC, as soon as they lost injunctive relief in Lee, but it's still in the second lawsuit that's ongoing that takes up where Lee ends in July 1st, 2017. That one now has the injunctive relief. Injunctive relief is the part that had the UFC kind of nervous, because that would, if they lost a case and the judge ordered changes of contracts, that would destroy their business model. So that would compel them to probably have to settle for a much higher amount. But they point out that this is a healthy amount. They point out other cases. They cite examples. And they have several declarations from over 50 fighters. I believe it's 56 total, including some of the named plaintiffs, talking about how they want the settlement, why they want the judge to accept the settlement, why they don't want to risk it on a trial, and why they need the money.
Quick question. With the Johnson class, okay, if they were to win, just like they go all the way to court, and if they were to win, and there was some injunctive relief to happen, how fast would that injunctive relief have to take place? Because in the Lee class, like, let's say they don't approve this settlement and this ends up going to trial. UFC has said, if we lose, we're going to appeal. Can the difference here being injunctive relief and not money. So would that be the same thing? Appeal, or would the judge say effective immediately, effective in 3 hours or 24 hours or 48 hours? You must, alter your contracts this way, and this way. To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!